I know some professors who refuse to teach on this. I'm biased, but I'm fair. Now, let's look at the objections. And I've got quite a few here. The first one here, and our happy's kind of divided as individual versus cultural, but many of them will kind of overlap. So let's look at the first, individual. Now, here's the thing. I said to you, this is the worst view I would ever cover in any class whatsoever. It's really conceptually bankrupt, I think. I can't make that decision for you. You have to make that decision. And this is what you're doing now. However, while I have all these objections, if this first objection were the only objection that I had, it would be enough to completely toss the view. It's such a damning objection. So let's look at it. It's self-defeating. Now, what does that mean? Self-contradictory, self-refuting. This means, okay, let's continue reading. In claiming that there are no objective moral truths, that itself is an objective claim to moral truth. Now, why would that be such a bad, damning objection? Is because if I got up in front of an audience and I said, I'm not speaking English, that is self-contradictory, because that's what I'm doing, and yet I'm saying I'm not. And so if that's the first thing out of my mouth when I first stand up, I have undermined my position. Like, you're not going to listen to a word I say after that. And that's what this does. It's self-refuting in that respect. It says, there is nothing that exists out there, but it's making a claim about what exists out there. And really, technically, it should be, I suppose, agnostic about what exists out there, morally speaking. Now, the second objection, if that is too abstract and, heady for you, the second objection is a concrete instance of that first one. So think about the principle of tolerance. And here I actually came with some examples to use. Now, I usually write this on the board. I'm doing this here in this sort of program, but you can see what I have here on the top, moral objectivism, on the bottom, moral relativism. And you have A, B, C, right? And you can think of these as A, B, C. You can think of them as individual people, like if you're thinking of the individual stripe, moral relativism, or you can think of them as different cultures, A, B, and C. Either way. And on the top view, objectivism, there is, as you can see, that bar goes across, the bracket goes entirely over. There's something, I've written moral law there, but you could say morality, you could say moral truth, but there's something that applies universally and objectively, kind of like laws of physics apply. It doesn't depend on how you feel about it. That's just the way things are. Now, the interesting thing is that A, B, and C need not be aware of this moral law or these moral truths. They could be completely ignorant and yet still be, like, you could be completely ignorant of gravity, I suppose, yet still be subject to gravity, interestingly. Now, on the bottom, where it says moral relativism, there is no such overarching moral law. There just is, and so I've written this. I have a little bar there. We're going to draw an X to that because in reality, all we have are just these kind of mini brackets, the individualized, coherent systems, right? A does its thing, B does its thing, C does its thing, to each his own, right? Now that's the setup. I'm a visual learner. I like to think about this visually. But let's think about this next objection. When it comes to tolerance, what are we talking about? Let's read. Tolerance seems a good principle to operate by, and it's exactly what moral relativism uses. It says, the way moral relativism presupposes tolerance, it's an objective moral principle that everyone should operate by. Now, what that means is that usually, and I've drawn here in the board, this is the way that moral relativism gets off the ground. The idea is that everyone should be tolerant of everybody else's decisions on how they want to run their life morally. That's just it. I mean, so agree to disagree. That is there in that principle of tolerance. I should respect other people's decision, and if B wants to do something that goes about his life and he wants to run it a certain way, what do I care, right? But as you can see, that presupposes that tolerance is this overarching view, right? Let's all get along. Let's all respect each other's decisions. And there is no such overarching view. So the real situation would look like this. You still just have those mini systems down there. You can almost think of it like this, okay? On the bottom, moral relativism would look something like a difference in playing a board game. All right, so like, let's say A wants to play a board game. They move their men using a spinner. B likes to move his men using a draw of cards. And then C likes to roll the dice. All right, and everything is internally coherent. That works for A, works for B, works for C. Works for everyone. And that's totally fine because there is no overarching rule, let's say in our world, like that says the board games had to be played a certain way. That's exactly what we're saying about this. Like if there were such a rule that says, if you're going to have a board game, it needs to be done by dice, then okay. But there is no such thing. And so if A can get away with, hey, it's internally coherent as long as you're consistent with your own ethical standards, fine. You be you. You go do you. You be you. Agree, disagree. You move on to your way. Now, this raises an interesting paradox because this is called the paradox of tolerance. What if B, let's say, doesn't want to be a tolerant person? They just, like, in their moral system, they don't agree with being tolerant. A, of course, wants that, right? And so the reality of the situation, since there is no overarching tolerance law, right, moral law that says that everybody be tolerant, what A is saying is when he says, oh, that's not fair, don't be like that. To be anti-tolerant would be like, what if B is just being mean, let's say? B is starting to attack A. Let's put it in real concrete terms. Suppose B is a real exclusive racist person, like a white supremacist, let's say. Like, he does not want to practice tolerance of any kind because he doesn't like other races, let's say. He's very non-tolerant. Well, according to moral relativism, that's totally fine. He should be allowed to practice whatever internally coherent moral system that works for him. When A cries foul and says, you're not doing it the right way, who cares? You don't have a picture of, again, there's no, that's like A saying, hey, buddy, you should use a spinner to play with your board game, not cards. But again, there's no law that says everybody should do it a certain way. So in the reality of the picture, A in crying foul is just saying, hey, this is what we do in our system, in the system of A. You're doing something different, and we don't like that, but we wouldn't do it in our system. That's all. That is all they're saying. And so, interestingly, the paradox of tolerance, you can have extremely anti-tolerant, coherent systems that proliferate, and this is all literally allowed. Very interesting. Now, look at the next objection. Number 3, moral disagreement is impossible. Now, it's nice to be like, okay, agree, disagree, and I'll play nice and get along. But it's much worse than that. For example, let's suppose I say abortion is wrong. You say abortion is morally okay. It's totally okay. If both of our statements are true, which is what moral relativism claims, then we really can't be disagreeing about anything. So, because it really literally looks like this. I'm A, I say it's wrong, you say it's not wrong. Well, why is it? Well, not only because those are different systems, like playing by the rules of the game, but literally again, if you go back to the handout, that quick and in a nutshell definition, that second part, there's always an assumed, if not stated, extra clause, true for me according to my culture or something. So what this is saying is, in effect, this. Abortion is wrong when A says that according to my moral views, and then B is saying abortion is not wrong according to my moral views. There is literally no disagreement even possible, because that's like saying, in my version of the game, we play with cards. In my version of the game, we play with a spinner. Or, hey, according to my taste profile, I like strawberry. According to yours, you like something else. Like, that is not a disagreement at all. We're both saying something true, interestingly. Now, let's move on to another objection down into the cultural variety. Number one, it is also self-defeating, which it just kind of replicates. Again, these can be shared, they can be blended, and but look at number two. Criticisms of other cultures, nations, etc., is impossible. Now, this is the first time, like the Holocaust. Okay, so this is the first major red flag for the view. There's actually three massive red flags, and if any, like if you come across a moral theory, any theory that requires that you give up your deeply held moral intuitions. Moral intuitions, fine. I mean, I may need to give up, right, if they're like just surface level. But if it's something like Holocaust bad, that's a deeply ingrained moral intuition that I'm not willing to give up. That is really actually bad. So, well, does it say it's okay? Well, let's look at what it says. Criticisms of other nations, cultures, impossible. Hitler and the Nazis in the Holocaust was, according to moral relativism, right for them. And if we're moral relativists, we can't say that they were objectively wrong in exterminating 6 million Jews, Polish prisoners, Soviet, etc. All we can say is that it's wrong from our perspective. It's wrong for us. Now, you have the situation like this. Again, there's no overarching moral law. A would be 1940s Nazi Germany. B would be us in the U.S. now, let's suppose, if that's your country, or whatever country you have. And then they're okay with it, and we're not okay with it. There's no overarching law. So really, the situation just looks like this. And you might think, maybe that's enough. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's a strong enough condemnation of the Holocaust. I don't know about you, whether you've ever been to, say, a Holocaust memorial museum or even one of the concentration death camps. A couple of years ago, I went to Auschwitz in Poland. And it is just the gravity of walking on that, going into where they gassed people to death. You walk in some of the rooms, you see the shoes, you see the crutches and medical devices, handicap devices, and the suitcases, and then they'll let you take pictures of all those, but what they won't let you take pictures of is the hair. They still have, after 80-something years, the hair of people that were shaved off before they sent them to the baths, the showers, which were really just the gas chambers. There was still some concern about gas in the air or in the rocks that they prohibited having an open flame anywhere down in those cells because it's just too dangerous. And if you have, back to the red flags things, if you have a moral theory that just says, we wouldn't do that. It's not something we would do, but like, Holocaust, not only we wouldn't do that, but you also have to simultaneously affirm that it was right for Nazi Germany to do that. That was right. According to their internally coherent moral system, they were actually morally correct in doing what they did. We wouldn't do that. Any moral theory that can only give that light of a condemnation is a really, really massive red flag. Now, let's look at the next one. Moral improvement as a society is impossible. In this example, let's take, for example, slavery in the U.S. This is different from the other one because in the first one, we're thinking of different cultures, like, let's say, Germany over there, let's say, versus the U.S. over here. They're doing something different, and the U.S. is doing something completely different. We just kind of have different perspectives. This one is using the same culture, but at different times. Because what this objection says is that moral improvement or moral progress itself is actually impossible. Why? Well, because, we can think of them in different cultures, us now, us, them, 1860s US, where they were totally permissible of slavery, not totally entirely, but in the large majority they were. And then in the US now, we're not. And this is another major red flag, because we can't say, we would like to say, look, even if you're very you're Black Lives Matter, you really love the idea of reparations and all that, and you're very, pro African American, Black, and so on and so on, and you hate cops, let's just imagine that's your situation. You would still want to acknowledge that, in the very least, our society is better off, morally speaking, that we've improved. We're not perfect, but we've improved because we don't have slavery anymore. That's been like the chattel slavery in the American South. On moral relativism, you can't say that. You cannot say that we're better. Because again, going back to there's no overarching moral thing that would judge whether this one is good and this one is bad. There is no such thing. It's just we do it different. The most we can say is that we wouldn't do that, as I see on this handout. The most we can say is that our culture now doesn't approve. It's wrong for us. Though again, simultaneously affirm this, it's apparently right for them at that time. Now, that's another major red flag. Now that completes that handout, but I've got one more. This is called the top 10 problems of moral relativism, inherited by one of my professors. And I'll look at a couple of them. The second one is actually the third major red flag, so we'll get to that in a sec. But first, let's look at one. The scope of cultural moral relativism is hopelessly vague. What constitutes a culture or group in the relevant sense? Most people belong to several groups, say American, university-educated, Christian, Southern, and so on. There may be conflicting values between groups, so what gets the priority? For example, let's say that I'm a pregnant young woman who's Catholic and lives in Southern California. I'm a part of different cultures. I'm part of the California culture that says, hey, abortion is totally permissible and even probably a good thing and progressive. My Catholic culture says it's totally not permissible. It's bad. So which one takes precedent? Which one takes priority? Which culture do I belong to? And you might think, well, you just go with the one you most strongly identify with. But that's not good enough. Because that just, at that point, is just a matter of preference. I like this one more? It appeals to me more? No. Morality shouldn't be like that. I like this one more, so I'm going to do it. Morality is a lot more binding than that. So that's a problem. And that's only when you consider two cultures. Many of us are part of dozens. The second one, third major red flag, reformers. If moral relativism is true, then what is right is defined as whatever the cultural majority believes is right. Then somebody who's a moral reformer, like Jesus or Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, right? You can name all these kinds of people. They are by definition morally evil. They are morally wrong. They are bad for what they're doing. Why? Because, well, the culture sets the morality and you're going against the grain. That means you're in the wrong. You're actually, so all those abolitionists who were abolishing slavery, those people like William Wilberforce, he, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, all those people were morally evil because they were going against the cultural correct thing. Not just because, not just that, but the morally correct thing, because what is morally correct is defined by culture on this view. So that is a major red flag. Any moral view, again, that says this should really raise red flags for you. In this case, this moral view is the consequence of it is saying that Jesus, Gandhi, all these abolitionists, by definition, Martin Luther King, they are morally evil. Not just because of but because they were going and trying to change things for what they thought was the better. Who cares? They were going against the grain, and that makes them evil. That's a massive red flag. Now, a couple of other ones real quick. I want to take a look at number 6. There can be no moral persuasion. So we looked at the idea that you cannot have disagreement. That doesn't even exist at all. But let's suppose you could disagree. Let's suppose that you could disagree about flavors of ice cream, right? Like morality is like that. Like, I like strawberry, why don't? That's not truly a disagreement because we're just both saying the true thing. But let's suppose I wanted to persuade you of my tastes of things. I wanted to persuade you of the right, correct moral view, which I think, but I'm just a relativist. Well, the objection here is that there can be no moral persuasion. What would I do or say? Go back to the example of, cilantro. If you have the gene marker that makes cilantro taste like soap. There's no arguments or syllogisms that you can provide and lay out to me that will make me like that more. Like, I'm still going to think it's gross, right? Because it's like I approve, I disapprove, I like, I don't like. If that's what morality is, then there can be no moral persuasion. Okay, a couple more of these: impossible to live out consistently. It's morally incoherent. We saw that. 9, moral relativism is incompatible with our moral knowledge. This is the thing we were flagging when we were talking about those 3 moral flags. We have deeply held moral intuitions, some of which you may need to give up. Right? Like maybe it's eating meat factory farm, whatever, right? But maybe it's not. Maybe it's maybe it's, I don't know, environmental concerns. Like, some of those are moral intuitions, but they might not be as deeply held as, hey, genocide bad, slavery bad. Like, those are ones that so deeply held and obvious to the knower, the person who has more knowledge, which is anybody can have that, that those are not things that you should easily give up. And yet moral relativism is incompatible with those. So when I come across a theory like this that says, hey, give up, don't worry about those deeply held moral intuitions, I probably, instead of giving up the intuitions, I need to give up the theory. All right. Finally, moral relativism, if taken seriously, has tragic consequences. It's fine to talk about it as long as you think no one will really take it seriously, but ideas have consequences. And when taken seriously, the idea of moral relativism has terrible consequences. Now, if I put this into practice and live it out, I get something like what Mussolini described. Mussolini was a contemporary of Hitler. I had to tell my students, you know who Hitler is, obviously, but Mussolini, he was the figurehead in fascist Italy at the time of the Axis powers in World War II. And listen to this is a direct quote from him. He says, everything I have said and done in these last years is relativism by intuition. If relativism signifies contempt for fixed categories, which it does, and contempt for men who claim to be bearers of an objective, immortal truth, which it does have contempt for that as well, then there is nothing more relativistic than fascistic attitudes and activity. And he says, from the fact that all ideologies are of equal value, which is what relativists claim, they're all just kind of my view, your view, let's all agree to disagree, to each his own, that all ideologies are mere fictions, which is another consequence of it. The modern relativist infers this, that everybody has the right to create for himself his own ideology and to attempt to enforce it with all the energy of which he's capable. And that's what will happen. If there is no truth of morality that we are all bound to live by, then it's just a matter of whoever the biggest is, whoever's the most powerful, they get their way. They get their way. It's not a matter of, like, if I try to persuade you, I don't need to persuade you of any truth because there is no truth. It's just a matter of, well, if I like my theory more, which I do, of course, that's why I hold it, I just want to enforce it on you. And if I'm really powerful and bigger than you, then I can do that. That's the consequence of moral relativism. That's exactly how you would do that. Now, before we go, I also want to look at one final thing, and that is this. I meant to fit this in earlier, but it's worth fitting in a very short time. There's some attractions to the view. There's one argument, there's another attraction to the view in the form of this argument. And it would be this. I've replicated the argument here. The idea that the diversity thesis, that is, look, man, anywhere you look, people believe in different things, different moral views. All right, we'll call that the diversity here. It's moral, right and wrong varies from society to society. If people believe they have different moral codes, let's say. And then from that, we'll have what we will call a dependency thesis, the idea that it seems that the relativist wants to make this inference. Moral principles derive their validity from cultural acceptance. And so that right there is an invalid argument, because put in here, instead of moral in number 1 and moral in number 2, moral principles, moral, right and wrong, put in, I don't know, scientific. Like, scientific right and wrong varies from society to society. That's actually true, right? People disagree about scientific truths. Some people think the earth is flat. Some people think we didn't go to the moon, right? So some people think that it's geocentric universe. So there is disagreement. Disagreement exists. That diversity thesis is true, not just for morality, but also for scientific truth. But it does not follow from that scientific principles derive their validity or truth from the fact that some cultural accepts it. Like, therefore, just because there's disagreement, there is no right answer and everybody's right. We just throw up our hands. Everybody's right. You're right because your view derives its validity or truth from you accepting it, and so on and so on and so on. That does not work in any other sphere or discipline whatsoever on the face of the earth. So why think that it would happen in ethics? Now, it is difficult to get to the answer. And some things we may never get to. But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying, right? As an objectivist, you still think these things are discoverable, even if you may not ever get to them. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, all right? And you certainly shouldn't just throw your hands up and say, well, nobody knows, nobody cares, or just whatever. I'll just do whatever I want, because these things certainly have real world consequences, as we saw at the end of the top 10 list. Now, there's more I want to talk about, more I want to say, and I could keep going on for another 20 or so minutes, but my computer ran out of memory. I'm gonna have to get a better computer or something, and this is about to shut off automatically anyway. So this is a long enough video anyway, so I appreciate you hanging in there, and I'll probably end up chopping this up into multiple parts and shorts and smaller segments, coherent segments themselves, so you can see it. But if you've hung this long, I really appreciate you for supporting this project, and I really look forward to whatever comments, likes, share, subscribe, all the business. And if you like what you see here, please leave a comment and just say, hey, I'm taking requests as well. Not that I'm running out of content. There's so much to share, but I also want to just hear what you're interested in. So let me know, and I look forward to being there with you next time. So take care.